Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Art of Pitching Masterclass here at LALIFF Connect 2020. We are so excited today. My name is Anna Souza. I'm the industry programmer for LALIFF this year. I also work at Sundance as a manager of programming and associate programmer over there. And I am so excited about the panelists that we have here with you today to take us deep into the world of pitching as it is now and in the future. We've got Pete Corona, the manager of scripted original series at Netflix. We've got Dianna Mogolon, the senior vice president and general manager of Stage 13. And we've got Flavio Morales, the executive vice president of Endemol Shine Latino US Initiative. So we are so incredibly excited and so humbled that you three were able to join us here today. So thank you so much for being here, first of all.
Thank you.
And so I'll take us through each panelist. I'd love for us to, first of all, start to discuss your role at each of your companies, and then also kind of what your background has been, a little recap for us, and also maybe one fun thing that you've either been cooking or watching during quarantine, just to contextualize for all of us. Flavio, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thank you. I work at Endemol Shine, and I have a really interesting hybrid sort of position. So I work on initiatives that have a Latino theme, talent, or idea. I work as a bridge between our company, Endemol Shine Boomdog in Mexico, that handles all of Latin America and US Hispanic, predominantly Spanish language. And then I work with our US team on developing content in English. And I also get to work with our sub companies, which is Truly Original and 51 Minds on the unscripted side. So I get an interesting perspective because I work both scripted and unscripted. And I've been there for almost going on 5 years. Prior to that, I ran programming at Mundos, where I worked with Dianna, where I was there for 9 years. And before that, I helped launch LATV, where I was there for 6 years. So it's kind of a little bit about what I do and what I've been doing in the meantime. I don't cook. I don't have any abilities with tools or being crafty at all. So the only thing I can say is we started watching Killing Eve, which was great, and Casa de las Flores. A lot of wrestling documentaries, which I'm not ashamed to share. I got my WWE app up and running, so doing that and starting to play video games. So that's what I've been.
Did you say starting to play?
Starting. Okay. Yeah, I'm terrible. I'm just starting. Yes.
Just want to make sure.
There's no time.
Like you were a millennial.
No. And that's my story.
You're sticking to it, Flavio. You're sticking to it.
Yes.
Pete, why don't we go to you next?
All right. So I work currently at Netflix as manager of original scripted series, primarily English language. So that covers co-pros and studio shows, as well as fully owned, fully managed series. Have about 16 projects on a slate, launched 7 titles last year. The productions cover most of the globe in terms of where we film. My most recent series that's going to come out this summer, Warrior Nun, filmed in Malaga, Spain last year. So get to travel a lot when there's no COVID. But, yeah, so I work in the genre side. So fantasy, horror, sci-fi, thriller is the purview of what I do. And prior to Netflix, I was executive director of development at Marvel Television, where I was overseeing their horror slate, including the Ghost Rider, which was the first Latino Ghost Rider that appeared in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And then I started my career at CAA and worked on A&E's first scripted series, The Cleaner, with Benjamin Bratt.
Amazing.
Like Flavio, I am not a cook. I don't think you want to eat any of my food. But I did attempt at make an attempt at polverones because I love them so much, and I'm a sucker for something sweet. and I made a vegan version. I know, cue rolling eyes, it's fine. They turned out pretty good, if I do say so myself. And in terms of television shows, gosh, I watch everything. I live by myself, so I watch a lot of programming and no one to tell me not to. So Vast as the Night is the last movie I saw, which I highly recommend if anybody can head out to the drive-in movie theaters. It was a very fun, experiential feature.
Thank you.
That's awesome.
I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh my God. Okay. So Dianna, Mogollon, Stage 13, super grateful for everybody being on the panel. Thank you, Flavia. Thank you, Pete. I run Stage 13, which is sort of a studio or mini studio / pod over at Warner Brothers that was founded a few years ago. And we we're kind of like the home for fresh, new, diverse worlds and voices and characters, formats, you name it, anything kind of new or different that complements sort of the big universe or ecosystem of Warner Media and Warner Brothers. We kind of tackle that in both scripted storytelling and unscripted storytelling, and in all genres. So from comedy to horror to sci-fi, you name it. We have had over 20 projects in the last few years. Started with some great, award-winning, digital web series, and now we're obviously have scaled up into longer form, hours, half hours, and films. Some projects you guys may be familiar with, like Special on Netflix. It's Bruno. Let's see here, Two Sentence Horror Stories, which is a great horror anthology series on the CW and Netflix. So a lot of fun stuff. We are super excited about partnering with festivals like LALIFF and always paying it forward and giving back and making sure that we are activating all those amazing diverse voices from all around the world. Oh, the rest of it. Okay, so before Stage 13, I was in Mundos, as you heard from Flavio, my former partner in crime in Flavio at Mundos at NBC Universal. And then before that, I was on the selling side, producing side. I've kind of done it all in my career, very entrepreneurial. So the idea of helping build Stage 13 was very appealing to me at Warner Brothers. Can't believe it's almost June and we're in this quarantine world. Done cooking. I'm a mom of 2, so always cooking with the whole family. In fact, my teenage son is now a sort of a cook himself, or likes to cook for us, which is great. I've done albondiga soups with my younger son. Tried some, desserts and pies, don't come out very well. And then watching, besides the normal cues, for my husband and I, we have tried to take this opportunity to watch a lot of classics with the kids, or introduce them to more, movies or classics. The one that's on our queue, and it's going to sound really silly, like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, Misery. I mean, these are like, classics. We just saw Argo the other day. So just, award-winning stuff that they should just have in their little library as they grow up.
Wow, fantastic. I'm going to also take this chance to share my screen a little bit just for a hot second and to share a video of Stage 13 so we can get a glimpse into some of the projects that you were talking about. So let's see, and hopefully this should be working. One moment. Oh. Oh. Can everybody see this screen?
Yes.
Great.
Industry is a tough industry. The biggest advice I could give is that you just cannot be afraid of failure. You just have to go out there and make something.
I grew up in Highland Park, born and raised in LA by a single mother. Now I'm touring the world. Music is my job. So anybody out there with a dream, if you work hard, it will come.
My advice would just be do a lot. Don't sit around and wait for somebody to make you famous.
You know you're a boss-ass bitch when you can be the CEO of a corporation with crazy hair, tattoos all over the place, and wear leather jackets every day to work.
If you want to be and do something good, if you're not crazy, you can do it.
You gotta be a little crazy.
I thought there was a space for a story that was more centered in a world that we can all relate to, or at least the people I know can relate to.
I didn't live in Mexico my whole life. And moving to Canada, for me, it was so important to keep my roots and my traditions alive.
Great. Well, now I'm going to kick it off with a question of, well, I mean, we'll have a couple of different tenets that we'll get to, but I'd love to kick it off with kind of the elements of a good pitch and to ask each of you, what makes a good pitch? I mean, it's the $1 million question, or conversely, what makes for a bad pitch and which is easier to define? I don't know if anyone wants to start specifically, otherwise I might kick it to Dianna first.
Well, I think I'll start with the positive, right? What makes a good pitch? I think that, I mean, I don't have sort of the 1, 2, 3, but I think that there's a few things that I think come to mind. Number one is, you have to have sort of an authentic voice behind it, whether that's unscripted or scripted. Like, what is this world and why should we care? So you have to have sort of a team or the filmmakers or creators that are coming in with that very well crafted out, and a story that is obviously differentiated, distinctive, that feels like it's from the heart. And then you have to have a good pitch, like the actual sort of meat on the bones is that how do you articulate or communicate that in an effective, impactful way to your said potential buyer, right? And every buyer is a little bit different. So a good pitch is, if you do the homework well, having sort of a bullseye, in terms of the recipient, the seller, the pitcher, and the buyer in the room. And then I would add that you may forget about this, but I think the other element of a pitch is sort of the after the pitch, right? The post-pitch process and follow-up, because some may be an immediate no, not right for us. Some may be sort of a maybe, and you leave a little door open. How do you kind of convert that into an eventual yes, or it may be a no today, but there may still be a relationship there to be cultivated for the future.
Yeah, I agree with all of those points. And in addition, I tend to think of it as a concentric circle of when you start on the outside of the pitch of, the world and what you're talking about and how you can start to relate to the people who you're pitching to and why this may be interesting. And then slowly start to get specific about that pitch. And then within that, you'll get nuance and then getting to the meat of the bones and then, pitch your series. So it's like, I love the forest and like, here's why the forest is so important. And specifically, here's why I love oak trees. And obviously I'm just making this as an example, but, and never underestimate the power of passion, because passion sells so much. And we want to hear that in the pitch. And particularly now with having this performative aspect of being on camera, it really does land when you can see the excitement on people's faces.
I think it's also about, to your point about personalizing it, we just had a rehearsal for a pitch and the writer gave us the story, like this is a story. And then we were like, okay, it feels flat. And then the next day he came back and then he started it with the story of why he started writing in high school. And that little piece connected back to the story. And all of a sudden we all sort of leaned forward. And it's about passion, and it's about getting to understand, why is this so important? Why am I hearing this pitch, right? It's like there's 10,000 shoes you can buy, but why this particular pair of shoes? What makes this pair of shoes so special? So, and it's also doing a lot of pre-research. So since I'm not a writer, I want to help my writer by doing as much research of the platform channel executives that we're pitching to. Why are they going to care? What is there a project that is something similar that they've done in the past that you can come back and say, hey, do you remember when you did this? Well, this is why I think this show could be special. So it's as much about the story that you're pitching, but also realizing what is going to be that connective line to the executives in the room for them to care.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Dianna, were you going to add something?
No, I said absolutely. I'm sorry. Normally, see, in person, I'd be like,
No, yeah.
Forgot audio is on.
Yeah, of course. But I mean, on the flip side, maybe not what makes a bad pitch to have that negative spin, but what are maybe some pet peeves or things that you wish that filmmakers might know before pitching to you, things that you wish would be like avoided or kind of easy pitfalls that people could avoid?
I think Flavio started to touch on it when know your audience. So a lot of people come in not knowing what the executives, what's under their purviews. So it really helps to know, don't pitch me like a hard drama if you know that I do genre, for instance, or if you know that we already have a project on service or on the network that's exactly like that, you're probably not going to want to hear a similar pitch to that. So it's a lot of homework, and pitches that are intentionally vague to try to catch as much interest as possible when they should be doing the opposite and being very specific and nuanced about their pitch, rather than like a kitchen sink of things when they hope that somebody will attach or hook onto something within that pitch.
That's a big one. I mean, the specificity, I think sometimes people are a little scared about the specificity, but when you think about some of your favorite personal shows or some of the biggest cultural game-changing, series, they tend to be, somewhat specific in the point of view, which allows it to be that much more relatable and universal. So I think that specificity is also going to make it more memorable, and allow you to, really narrow sort of your world and characters in a way that's going to actually allow you to actually blow it up a little bit more. One thing for me, I think, is when you have somebody that comes in with, whether it's a good or a great pitch, and then normally in that situation, there's going to be follow-up questions. Have they thought it through beyond, here's what the show's about. Well, what about in season 1? What about where does this character go? Where do you think in season 3? So being prepared back pocket so that if there are those questions, you're ready to answer them. And it obviously shows that you have very deliberately thought through characters, worlds, pathways, arcs. Not to say you're not open to feedback and to, iterate, but definitely that this is a world well, and that that these characters, and the intentions and how they're going to connect with audiences.
Yeah, and also on the mechanics of the pitch, making sure that you're not trying to shoehorn everything into the pitch, and realizing that everybody's time is precious, including the writers and the people who are pitching it, because most likely we have a meeting right after. And so the pitches that go a little long show us that maybe that they're not as prepared and they didn't leave the last 10 or 15 minutes for questions. And so they're just piling through story and narratives and themes, and without any opportunity for us to ask the important questions. So I think it's also the interactivity at the end is important.
Exactly.
Yeah, you've known you've been in a bad pitch if there are no questions after you. You
said it, Flavio. That's true.
You're dead. Yeah.
By the way, some of the best pitches, in fact, one of our shows that we sold in the room, it was like literally 30 minutes or less. In fact, we were nervous because but one of the people in the pitch was late to the pitch. And we're like, oh God, that's the worst thing that can happen. They crushed it, or the team, the creators crushed it, and literally it was like 35 minutes or less, and there were a couple of questions, but it went awesome. So that timing piece is really important, Pete, because when like you're looking at your watch, or they're checking their phone, or and in this case Zoom, there's a lot of things you can see with big faces on cameras.
Yeah.
Expand a little bit on something that Flavio was saying, and all of you to some extent, in terms of being specific and kind of customizing. Does the delivery of the pitch matter as much as the content? Is one more important than the other? How do you kind of strike a balance between the way that you're pitching, as well as what you're actually pitching your idea?
I've sat with amazing people that can pitch, and we haven't been able to sell a project because when it comes down to the page, it's just not as strong as the performance. So it is a balancing act, and I think that one of the biggest challenges for creatives, and I meeting with a lot of writers, is this is a really tough thing to crack. It is very difficult to get an idea to get across and to get that momentum, and it's not really easy. And I find it particularly like what I do, because I can't go and do a reality show about an African-American family. That doesn't fall into my purview. So I have a very specific job to do. And so it makes it hard. It makes it really hard talking about being very specific when you're pitching a very specific story to an executive that does not understand your culture or where you come from. That tells you, oh, well, I love it, I just don't understand it. So part of your job is to be very specific with your pitch, but then also show how universal your story is, you know, and so that people understand it. And you know, it is a tough one when it is what LALIFF's like mission is, right? It's about being able to tell your very specific story because it's valid in a room. For the most part, it's changed, but for the most part, a room where it's tough. If you know, it's a tough one. You're hearing people criticize that there's 3 shows that are from East LA. Like there's too many shows about East LA. There's 3 too many, right? And so it's a tough one. It takes a lot of work to develop an idea to get it to the point where you can push it through. And it's a battle of patience and being surrounded in an environment that is going to allow you to get your pitch to be better, because even the subject matter is going to be at times challenging.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, I heard once an executive told me, and it's always stuck with me, which is people buy shows, not companies. So you really need those advocates. You're really speaking to that person or people in the room, and you're hoping for that connective tissue, because at the end of the day, let's say a pitch goes well, that executive or executives need to sell it into more people, you know, so there's always selling happening and pitching happening to get something, imagine, all the way to getting it produced or greenlit, etc.
And kind of on a practical level, what are some things that you advise people to include when pitching? Like what materials? Like, is there something that stands out to you? Is that ever gimmicky if people are trying something different? I'm wondering about, you know, again, additional materials, performers in the room, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you have to treat each pitch individually and tailor it in a bespoke way so that you know, not every pitch needs a sizzle reel, not every pitch needs a deck, not every pitch needs, you know, visual aids, but it does help whether you're world building with like a huge sci-fi show, maybe a sizzle reel will help. Maybe, you know, fleshing out those characters and having what some of those monster creatures look like. But if it's like a hard drama, maybe you're just more focused on what potentially casting could look like, particularly if you want this to be for an underserved audience, like the Latino audience or the Black audience or Asian audience or whatever that might be.
Agree. I mean, I think that the sizzle is something that it's used more in unscripted, but I can see it definitely, obviously, in scripted, how it really helps. If you have a really amazing, strong video, that could definitely, now with Zoom pitches now and video pitches, it's figuring out, do you play it, do you not, do you send it afterwards? It's a little bit of that, but if it's an incredibly strong reel, that, by the way, could be great for the pitch, but again, it could be something to arm your executive to then sell it internally, you know, that's good. For scripted, we like to work with lookbooks or pitch decks that are good just to have anyway from the artist and to work on it together. And then with the video pitch, because a 30 or 40 minutes like this is talking can maybe in some cases get a little bit long. Adding the element of some creative or visuals can help a pitch. We've seen that happen recently quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. I want to move on to kind of talking about the broader landscape, especially as we've been touching on that in different ways, but and especially kind of the point of doing your research and kind of understanding who you're pitching to. How do you feel like filmmakers can actually better understand not only who they're pitching to, but also like where their pitch is existing in the current marketplace? And how can they kind of balance that creative with the business side, coming at it from that point of view?
Yeah, that's an important piece to pitches. When I was a younger executive at a British production company, I didn't have a lot of money to develop with. So one of the first things that I did was I just watched everything that was on the landscape, no matter what it was. And every network has websites and you can see all the programming schedule, right? So from an easy exercise of what is on this season, what was canceled, and there's a ton of websites that show what was canceled and what's renewed and what new shows are coming up. And on Deadline, you can see, you know, the Pilot Panic series that they have. So it's really just doing a lot of notes, making sure, hey, they have 3 vampire shows, they have 4 whatever, it's seeing where that exists, and then also where does that fit within it. And you don't want to be too prescriptive of trying to shoehorn or make sure your ideas fit because you think that's a particular mandate, but also make sure that you're not being duplicative at the same time. It's a fine line.
We don't get a lot of pitches. We try to do everything in-house, but when we do get some pitches, I always ask, like, where would you see your show? And I hate that everyone says Netflix. I'm like, no, that is not your answer. Not because I don't like Netflix, but that is like that's too, like, you know what I mean? Like, to your point, it's like, where specifically do you see it, and where are the comparable other shows or films that fit in there? And it's, we tend to forget that this is a business. It is art, but it is a business, and knowing those elements. Now, the other thing about doing your research is it's not about being a writer and saying, I want to pitch my movie and I'm going to do it myself. It's about doing your research on who are the people that who are the managers, who are the smaller production companies that are looking for ideas. And even, we have, I remember someone came up to me like, I want to be a writer. And I said, well, that's great. Like, what writers programs have you applied for? And it was like dead silence. It's like, all the tools are there, and you have to, it's all about a step. Everything takes, it's several steps to get where you need to go. And for creatives, it is a very rewarding career, but it's only a select few. And those people, I mean, I love listening to podcasts of people's, like, how did Issa Rae get her deal, or how did Ava DuVernay get where she was? And you see, they worked, like, Ava DuVernay was a publicist. Like, she, worked all angles, and it's just part of the business. It's not a one track sort of way of getting to get where you want.
Yeah, even in that, being a little entrepreneurial helps, right? So if it is that you're a filmmaker or director, like, well, go shoot, even if it's on a shoestring budget. Like, it's always moving. Staying still is not an option. Always moving. Is it on the writing side programs? Is it writing? Is it finding a manager? All these different things to make sure that you're always progressing.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a negative thing to know what the DNA of your show is. So to Flavia's point, not everything should be on Netflix, not everything should be on HBO Max. If you know this is a CW freeform type show, and maybe there's only 3 places that you can sell it, but that is going to be much more strong a pitch than a pitch that's super broad that you want to try to sell all over town. So knowing what your show is will help inform where you should sell.
Absolutely. And jumping off of this, I wanted to ask, and drawing also on kind of what Dianna was saying earlier about people buying shows, not companies, even though it's a little of both in a way. I was wondering, are there ever factors or I'm sure there are factors outside of your control in terms of, are there pitches that you might be advocating for, but there are factors that are outside your control and you kind of need to take those into account? How do you kind of navigate that? And how do you keep your audience in mind when you're selecting pitches on your side as the decision makers?
What do you mean by out of our control? Like like COVID obviously is out of our control,
Yeah. I mean, that would be one for sure. Yeah. Or just like, again, in terms of like a mandate, or sort of trying to fit a balance of projects that you're personally passionate about, but also sticking to kind of the what the companies are looking for.
Well, when you're a seller, I mean, who has the leverage, right? The buyers or the sellers, and you could argue the buyers have the leverage, right? So platforms like Netflix really, dictate a lot, them and all the other buyers, because if, let's say, nobody necessarily is looking for, found footage show, let's say, then developing it, you can still do that, but it's going to have to be that much more compelling to get it to the top of the list, right? But if everybody's looking, right, we've heard all this in this room, right? We're looking for diverse, we're looking for, so then how do you make it unique or different, or what angles, what's the access point? So I think that always being in tune to the marketplace and what's happening is very important, because you're going to find the nooks and crannies that you're going to be able to differentiate and hopefully find that right pathway. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, I think you did.
Yeah, I think white space is a continuous moving target. So everything that we've just said, it's continuously doing your homework and seeing where things open up, because maybe there hasn't been a werewolf show in 3 years, because they all just got canceled. And so maybe that should be the one that you should do now. So it's just a constant keeping your eye on the ball.
Look at rom-coms, right? Everybody was like, oh, where are the and then all of a sudden look at, all the amazing ones on Netflix that have hit so big, and Crazy Rich Asians too. So like all of a sudden, like, and now especially with this need for comfort and intimacy in this world we're in, I want to watch rom-coms.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And kind of in going off of that to some extent, in these changes in audiences' tastes as well, how do you feel, and we touched on this a little bit, but how can you kind of retain that authentic voice while still making your project universal? And do you feel like this changes in the international versus the US landscape?
Well, I mean, we're finding that, hit's a hit, a good story is a good story. I mean, Money Heist and, Casa de Papel and Casa de las Flores. I mean, these things just take a life of their own. For us, for example, the Nicky Jam series that we did that just finally is airing on Netflix in the US. And just the fact that one of the biggest that we've seen on social media has been from the African American community that loves the show. And the show is predominantly in Spanish, but it feels, it's urban gritty. It's a Latino 8 Mile story. It shows that these stories, language is, it's funny. We were going through a list of ideas, and some of the shows, someone was asking what language. I'm like, oh, I didn't even talk about that. We're not looking at that right now. I think the more authentic the story, the more the universal the themes. So I think it goes back to that. And but it's interesting. Tomorrow, for the first time, I'm sitting in with our team from Brazil about a scripted series. I'm excited because they have the coolest accent when they're speaking English. So I'm looking forward to just hearing that call. But it's again, the being able to work with all of these different teams and all of these stories. And then for me, it's great because, well, I'm going to look at where is the Latino component to whatever it is that they're bringing. But it's fun. I mean, for you guys, it must be the same. But for me, it's eye-opening that in the 5 years that I've spent at the company, it literally went from very siloed entities to big, massive groups. And because of COVID, they're literally Zoom calls at 3 a.m. with the team from Black Mirror telling you best practices. And then the next day, the team from MasterChef globally talking about best practices, because it really is now just a global business.
Yeah, it's somewhat short-sighted to think of your show just as a domestic series, because with distribution and platforms such as Netflix or other OTT services, it's in hundreds of countries. So when you're building the show, always be specific, be authentic to that story, but have a global mindset. And when you're casting or where you set the show, so you can kind of weave in more aspects of the world within the show.
So true.
Yeah, absolutely. On a general level, I was also kind of wondering, how do each of you sort of track and find projects? How are you also seeking out and finding fresh ideas? And does this strategy change at all? Or has it changed at all with the onset of COVID? Are you finding that you're finding ideas in different sources or in new places?
I think it's all of the above. I mean, for us, I mean, there's the traditional sources are always there and always have been, whether that be agents, managers, et cetera. I think that where you get creative is, you know, having the good sense of sort of opening your bandwidth to international, global formats. You know, obviously festivals. Festivals are such a ripe place to discover and just really get familiar with so much great talent. So keeping like all on-ramps open, which is I think something that is very fruitful, versus sort of the traditional only. It has worked well for us at Stage 13.
Yeah, I'd second that. I mean, part of the fun of our job is that we get to find new voices and voices around the world that we'd like to work with. So it's a lot of tracking coming out of festivals. And now that festivals such as LALIFF are online, it gives people such a much more bigger platform now. And it's much more easier to get recognized by using those avenues of, you know, the writing programs, the directing programs, the producing, shadowing programs, and all of the even small programs that exist within the film and television festivals around the world. So it's really there for the taking. It's just people have to utilize it.
Yeah, one of the things that we're doing is we're looking at a lot of our existing IP on the international side. So for example, we took a format from Portugal, and then we brought in a young writer to develop a take for it. And it worked out well. So sometimes it's even taking pre-existing material and getting a fresh approach, which is interesting. Also, there's on the international side, a lot of writers that want to get in and do stuff in English. So we're getting a lot of interesting material that way. But you know, it can come from anywhere. And the project I've been working on for 3.5 years was out of an LA Weekly article that I was like, I gotta do this, and it's just kind of finally coming through. But you never know where you're gonna get it from. But again, it's tough for a new writer to like get in front and you have to have a lot of things moving your way and doing those programs and connecting people and having cheerleaders and advocates. Because you know, I don't know about you guys, but I literally could spend my entire job just reading, and that's not my job.
Right.
I spend most of my life reading.
Yeah.
Not cooking, reading.
No, not for the betterment of society.
There you go. There you go.
And I want to pivot a little bit, you know, considering the crazy times that we're all living through right now too. You've all touched on this a little bit to some extent, but how do you feel like pitching is going to change from now on, and how has it changed already just in these couple of months we've been in lockdown? You're talking about taking pitches over Zoom. Do you feel like that is something that might be extended into the future? Is there sort of a world where digital pitching will become more of the norm?
I think it's certainly an evolution. I don't think it'll ever go away. We probably won't be shaking hands as often as we used to. But I think there is something about being in a room with someone, but obviously with safe distancing practices, I don't know if that'll happen immediately. So we should probably plan for this to be the norm, and how are we going to adapt as this for the new norm?
Absolutely. I think this definitely is just another tool in the toolkit. I think, you know, when we used to say before all this, I'm working from home, you'd be like, yeah, okay, work from home. Now I think it's a whole new level of working from home, right? We're all like, you can be just as, if not more efficient. In fact, companies like stay at home, work from home. Yeah. The digital thing just gives it a little more, I don't know, there is that lack of intimacy, yet you can see people's, you know, face up close, like you are focused on it. So maybe it's one of those where you can choose depending on the pitch of the project, like, you know, this may work better than doing the in-person. But I think it's here to stay. It'll depend on the pitch, like Pete said, the pitch of the project. And frankly, the writer, the filmmaker, you know, comfort level probably.
And do you think we're going to see trends maybe in content creation, or kind of the types of stories that we might start to see from this period?
Oh, that's already happening. I mean, I don't know if you guys are like, again, big blockbusters and all that. Sure, that's going to happen at some point. But in the meantime, I think that memo came out like, 2 months ago. Like, if you have anything small in scope, if you have, found foot, anything, contained, or even can you shoot it during COVID, I think that message is out there. And I think, by the way, economics are going to change for all companies. So I think that having all of that in your bench is going to be important, whether that is the big blockbusters, the mid-level, the smaller, the bigger. I think that if you have, and I think a lot of some great new filmmakers tend to go for sometimes, that interesting horrors, sci-fi or something that's smaller but impactful and crazy. This could be a really interesting time in the next year to get those what would have been deemed like smaller or ideas, but that could actually have a lot of currency in this new age.
Mm-hmm. I do want to make sure that we're allowing enough time for a Q&A because there are a lot of questions coming through. So I think I'm going to start to address some of these, and we can always pivot back and forth. The first question we have is, do you think that all the Latinx stories are not universal enough for Hollywood, and how do we break that barrier?
I think they're highly universal, from family to interpersonal relationships to we're just like everyone else, right? We just happen to come from different places, and I think we've just begun to scratch the surface of what these stories look like outside of what we've traditionally seen. And I think the industry is responding to that, and we just need to present the best stories that we can tell. But I think we're all anxious for it, and we all want it.
Yeah, it's a matter of just, I mean, I think it's just about more directors, more writers, more people just taking it. What was the movie recently, The Infiltrators, that was done about the kids that were the dreamers. That was like a doc scripted hybrid, right? Mm-hmm. That was just such a powerful way of telling a story. There's going to be more of that. There's going to be more documentaries. There's going to be more short form, the creation of Quibi. Hopefully that'll get other storytellers to come on board. The more platforms, the more opportunity. I mean, that's what my job is based on. So I'm like, hopefully that continues. But it is a good time because the stories that are coming out, and it's not just, like you said, it's no longer a domestic play, it's an international play.
Mm-hmm. We got another question that was, do you think if you pitch an idea from a past show, for example, like a Brady Bunch, but you want the leads to be Latinos, would that be embraced?
Well, they did that with One Day at a Time, and that went on for a couple of seasons. I mean, something like that, it's about how you package it, right? Just, if you said it was Eva Longoria and Jaime Camil, you'd probably get some meetings for Los Brady Bunch.
Yeah, that's where I think, managers and agents and the team approach. So the writer or filmmaker shouldn't feel like they're alone on this journey. I mean, they should have a team, however you deem a team, again, to help them suss all this out, agent, manager, collaborators, etc. Because Flavia makes a good point that the idea plus maybe some of these potential packaging components could help actually, facilitate, accelerate the reception of that idea. I don't know if you can necessarily, use or reference an IP like that, like sort of, it would have to be like comps, and comps are commonly used, like, hey, this shows this meets that. That could be helpful. It could also hurt you a little because then people's frame of mind will think of that versus what do you want this show to be about specifically, the story you're pitching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would caution against, what is the value in that IP that you're trying to put Latinos into? Is there brand love behind it? Like, is the Brady Bunch relevant for the community? Or do you just want to create something from whole cloth that's completely new and that is creating a completely new IP and new brand love for whatever that show is?
Absolutely. And then I've got one that I'm glad came up because I wanted to pivot to this a little bit too, which is we've been talking a lot about television and series and short form, but what about features? How can you make an indie film appealing to streaming services and bigger companies?
Yes. In fact, Netflix, again, has a whole indie film division, right, Pete?
Yes.
I mean, the whole team. And I would say, I think Netflix is almost like the biggest film studio in that regard because they're distributor, because they have a whole indie, they have the bigger films. So the answer is yes. And I think budget levels are key there, great creative. I mean, look what's happening with COVID. Theatrical business is going to be revolutionized. So the smaller films, the medium films are going to have to find homes, and a lot of those are going to be hopefully these global streaming platforms. And if you have a great creative and you have a budget to make it at, that can be very compelling for these platforms as they fill and they need content.
And in terms of a longer form, how do you feel like when you're preparing your pitch, how should you shift your strategy if you're pitching a feature versus a short form? Like what goes into kind of the preparation for that?
Well, you have to go back to the root of the idea, right, guys? Like it has to really make sense as a feature versus as an episodic series that continues over multiple seasons. You know, in some cases we have redesigned a couple, or they've walked in the door as a feature, but then we made it an episode. But it takes time, creative work that you have to go in there and kind of redevelop and make sure it all makes sense, you know, for the creative and for the intent of the writer and the filmmaker. Mm-hmm. Would you guys agree, Pete, Flavio?
Yeah, I mean that's sound logic for features. I've only primarily, to be completely visible, is I've worked in television, so that's not my purview. But they're similar in that you still need the same elements of it being strong and knowing how to pitch it, and for features in particular, the festival circuit is extremely important, right? Because that's like proof of what you can do, whether that's, you can even do it in shorter form, whether that's a short, and then that will give you the platform to do much longer form, because everybody, including the indie feature team, is scouting those as well.
We got a long question that I'm going to paraphrase a little bit just to make it more manageable. Someone wrote about being a series regular on a Netflix show, and they've written a comedy, and they're asking about, and they have with 3 fellow castmates and fellow Latinx actors. And so they wanted to ask, what is the best way to move this project forward now that it's written? How do you workshop it with other writers or find networks? And he was asking specifically about Netflix and whether it makes it easy for actors to bring projects forward for pitches. And so it's more about coming at it from the cast side of things.
Well, speaking not on behalf of Netflix, but for myself, it's still the same formula. Is the pitch good? It can come from an actor, it can come from a DP, it can come from anybody, really. It's still, what's the strength of the pitch? And if you want to workshop it, I mean, the WGA has 10 or to 15 different committees that service different underserved communities, like the Muslim community or the Latinx community. So you can do that, or it's a find your tribe activity of workshopping that with other writers, and that takes work and time, and building relationships with other writers to test and poke holes to see if the show is solvent and something worth pursuing. So I don't think that anybody has a particular leg up advantage if you're on a show already. It's sort of a level playing field in that the content is king. So whatever the idea is, work on that.
Mm-hmm. Also, I have a good general one from an audience question as well. What Latinx show excites you the most right now, and why?
Better Call Saul is a good Latinx show. I like, Breaking Bad had some of the best Latino characters written in television for a period. And I got into a fight with a professor about it too, because they were like, something about like stereotype characters. I'm like, look, I mean, if you're watching it simply and purely as like a story and a craft and what they're doing, there's some great lines in there. There's some great actors getting to act. And some actors don't even have lines. They're just all visual performances. That and On My Block is probably one of my.
Okay, On My Block.
Agreed. On My Block.
Why On My Block?
To me, it's like it's such a fun. It's almost like Little Rascals, right? For it just, they're always getting into trouble. They're very authentic. It's very honest. It's really well written. And it's one of those few shows that like my kids watched on their own and just picked up on it. And I think they do such a really fun. It's a fun show.
I also love Vida. It's such a great, beautifully shot, nuanced series, and the fact that Tanya is such a champion of Latinx narratives and writers and directors. Another show to watch.
Yep.
And her background, being a playwright. That's very, again, we're talking about great ideas coming from everywhere,
Right.
Flavia, you touched on this a little bit with your earlier answer too, but there was a question about why do you think that all of the biggest Latinx shows have to be pigeonholed to stereotypes? Things like drug dealer stories.
They wouldn't, they're on because people are watching them. So like Mayans, which got picked up, I guess, for, I don't know, second season or third season, it's a popular show. I mean, Narcos Mexico, popular show. Can there be more ways of showing us in different ways? I mean, I think that's what we're all working towards. And again, I think a lot of it has to do with executives wanting and going in there and saying, look, we're going to make a change. I mean, the story of why Vida hit the air was great. They said, we're going to do a Latinx show. They bought 5 pilots. Those 5 pilots got into production, and out of those, but they made a commitment. They said, we're going to do it. It wasn't one script, and if it didn't do well, it was dead. It was a concerted effort, and they put their money behind it and the executives behind it. And Martha was incredibly influential in getting that show done. So it is a challenge. It is, and it's just about creating and crafting those stories, and hopefully there'll be a variety of Latino characters in film and TV.
And
you should see it all.
Yeah. The panelists here, the fact that there's more of us now than there were 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago is just a testament to hopefully good things to come. And, we need younger people not just to be writers and directors. We need executives and, assistants and people who are going to come up in the other side of the business that hopefully bolster the executive ranks to help tell these stories and buy these stories and create the stories.
And advocate, within the system, like outside and inside the system, but we should be able to have all kinds of shows, and we should just get like, oh, you only get 2 at bats and that's it. We should be able to have as many, and especially because hopefully our shows will resonate not only with all audiences, but at minimum, if they resonate in a very meaningful way with the most influential and powerful audience group there is, which are Latinos in this country, and I would argue globally, then that alone should be the reason why you double down, right? If not, best case scenario, everybody's going to come, and watch and enjoy and share and all that. So I totally echo what Pete says. We need more people of color and Latinx all throughout the industry in all different realms to be able to be that influential, pushing the boulder up the mountain.
Holding that door open for everybody.
There you go. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I had one that was, when considering content from a Latinx creator, is it disappointing for you if our stories are not specifically about being Latinx?
No, the story should be authentic.
Yeah.
You know, again, that's where you're managing expectations depending on where you're pitching. But again, the story and genre and arc needs to be authentic and feel everything we've said, great, compelling. And if there's an element of Latinx, fantastic. And let's make sure that rises to the top and make it as strong, but does it have to be 100% of it?
Mm-hmm.
That's my point of view, personally.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's one that kind of relates to this that just came in also, which is, what advice do you have for stories that are out of the Latinx box, that are sort of maybe unconventional?
In terms of narratives that just happen to have the Latinx, I don't know. Not sure I understand the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the question too, but I think it's in terms of not about being specifically Latinx, but something that is outside of that box by a Latinx creator. Kind of, what kind of advice would you have for someone who is telling a story that is not about being Latinx, but might be in a different genre or a different protagonist, or just outside of that box?
Yeah, I mean, just to point to things that, like this, to All the Boys I Love, for instance, Lana Condor's character, it wasn't centered on just her being Asian, but like of her in this like rom-com environment of her being, pining after this boy. And so like, that's what made that story universal, is that it was a love story, and it felt a little John Hughesy. And so she happened to be Asian in that, but they didn't shy away from her being Asian either. So that they're not mutually exclusive.
Totally.
And there's one that I think might not be the best to answer it necessarily, but I'll toss it and try it just in case. I've been told that most broadcasters won't listen to pitches without an agent. Are there any Latinx friendly agencies, or kind of how do you recommend finding an agent?
Diana, are you going to give your email out?
Yeah. I'll give yours, Flavio. Well, I mean, I don't know if finding an agent is the right way to go nowadays, but I mean, I'm speaking of what the times are today, but managers, I mean, I think that finding a really good advocate who's a manager who believes in your voice and is going to help you craft it and mold it is great. I think that's where some of these programs that I think both Flavio and Pete alluded to can be very helpful as well. And really, there's a lot of networking that has to happen. Writers groups connecting, getting referred. And yes, I mean, from a business standpoint, most platforms are not going to just accept unsolicited pitches. And that's actually not to protect the platforms, but to protect the writer and the creators themselves. So you want to make sure there's many different ways. It's not a one size fits all approach. But yeah, I would vote a little more on the manager side, just because there seems to be more longevity and just more probably a two-way dialogue to help you hone your craft.
And all of the good managers that are focused on finding new voices are referring to all of the writers programs and the WGA. And I mean, they're the ones that are like, they'll find you. But it's not going to be you walking in with a script into someone's office. Like that's going to be really hard. But there are, there's a couple of groups that are very young executives that work on the agency side and on the content side, and they all meet through these conferences or through the writer submissions and peer groups, which is, I mean, for me, that I'm really old, there weren't peer groups growing up where you could find like-minded people that were in different companies. That doesn't exist, and they exist now. So using social media, using LinkedIn, and finding where to get your material, which is one of the biggest things too, is getting your material read by people and then getting that criticism or getting those notes and addressing and making your material better. That's the other thing. It's not about that first draft.
Yeah, and utilizing the, the assistants and the coordinators of the world that where we once were at one point in our careers, and they're the ones who are hungry, and they're the ones who want to be representing people, whether they're on the management side or the agency side, and because they're the next generation of those agents or managers or whatever representative function that they serve. So that may be in the path for younger writers.
Right.
We are almost at time here, so I just really want to thank the three of you so much for joining today and for offering your insights and your wisdom and for kind of guiding everyone through pitching, especially in this strange time now that we're living through. And we're also really excited to announce that we do have an initiative and a form that you can fill out if you've attended this masterclass. It should be being dropped into the chat right now. Where you'll be able to submit ideas to be considered to potentially pitch directly to stage 13. Dianna, I don't know if you want to say anything about
we
that.
thought like, look, we wanted to host a panel and would love to obviously, walk the walk and hear. And I think in collaboration with your team at LALIFF, identify sort of top prospects and give a few folks a chance to prepare and do all the things we talked about, all the homework and the research, and then hopefully pitch us some ideas later this summer.
Yeah. So please be sure to click that form and fill out those ideas as soon as you can. And thank you so much for joining us. This has been really an incredible master class, and everyone is so appreciative of you guys taking the time. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much.
Good luck, everyone.
Thanks, Flavio. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.